Hello and welcome to another episode of the All Things Considered CX podcast. I'm Bob Azman, your host, and I'm really glad you're joining us again for this episode. We're kicking off a new season, fall season of episodes. So we've got some great new guests lined up, including our guest today, Tyler DeLarm, who's joining us from UnDigital. Tyler, welcome to the podcast. And if you would introduce yourself to our listeners.
Bob, thanks so much for having me. Um, my name's Tyler DeLarm, obviously. I'm the head of marketing at UnDigital. I've been leading performance marketing teams for the last 10 years. And currently, I manage the unboxing marketing strategies for some of the largest brands in the world.
Outstanding. So one of the things I said to Tyler before we got started was this whole concept of unboxing is really intriguing to me. So we're going to get into that for sure as it drives customer loyalty and experience. But before we do that, Tyler, how does somebody get in this business? So what's your career path? Tell us a little bit about your background. We love to know that.
Certainly. So believe it or not, I started out as a traveling musician. Like I really loved music. Performing it was my heart and soul. Still is. Um, when I had a daughter, I was like, traveling all the time isn't really conducive to being the greatest dad, or at least not the dad I want to be. And so I started looking for like, well, what are my skills? Like, where do they translate? And I realized like, I've been building a brand for quite a while. Like maybe I should try my hand at some marketing roles. Um, I started uh, pretty much at the bottom, right? And I worked my way up over the last 10 years. Um, Yeah, and I haven't looked back. Actually, it's so funny how similar marketing a corporation can be to like marketing your music. So,
Mhm.
um, I really got lucky.
So Tyler, this is interesting. You talk about building a brand because a lot of our listeners are trying to do that, and I don't mean in the sense of a corporate brand, but as much as I do their own brand,
Sure.
where they're new to the customer experience profession, they're new to marketing. There could be a number of different areas. So taking you back a little bit, what are some of the elements you did to build your music brand?
Oh, for sure. Okay, so when it comes to building a brand, right, the thing I would recommend than anything else is just kind of being true to yourself and whatever that means to you, right? Because like you don't want to be someone else, you don't want to create something that's already been created before. Like you're a unique individual, your ideas are unique and individual. And I think that you should start by building on that. Like, what am I passionate about? What do I want to be seen as? And then go from there. Um, Really identifying yourself and like your core identity is going to be more important than, I don't know, picking the right colors or choosing a good website. Um, and that's for both your brand and your personal brand. Um, you know, I, I I think I'm kind of a quirky, comical person, right? And I lean into that. Like my team knows that I am kind of a goof, and I'm happy with that. Like it makes me feel good. I think it makes them comfortable. Everybody should feel comfortable in your own skin, and when you're comfortable, your team is comfortable. It's a good way to be.
Mhm. And so you've clearly you've translated that into your new roles at UnDigital. Not new, you've been there for a while, but your roles at UnDigital. So tell us what UnDigital does.
Sure, sure. So we work with D2C brands to build out personalized unboxing experiences. And what that, I guess the easiest way to put that is kind of think of your emails and the way they're set up, right? So you've probably got audiences and segments, and you've got messages that go out to those specific segments. And then on the end of that, you've got measurements like KPIs where you're looking at, okay, what email did well, what email didn't do well. We've taken that process and put it into the unboxing experience. So for instance, first time customer, right? You might send them a welcome note. It's like, hey, Steve, thanks for ordering. I'm glad you got this thing. Here's how to use it. If you have any questions, please reach out to us here. And on the end of that, it's like, Steve, we're sorry we had an open package delivered to you. That's not really part of, who we are as a brand, and we want to do better. Here's a replacement. Um, and if you need us again, here's the best way to contact us. So it's kind of this end-to-end experience system that we're trying to help people put in place and learn how to measure. Um, we give them analytics back on it, and show them like, hey, this template that you have, it's doing really well. Or this one, it needs to be optimized because it's not really generating the results you're looking for.
And so I have to admit, I had not heard about this as a marketing strategy. And you're smiling, so maybe I'm not alone in that.
No,
So,
you're not.
well, that makes me feel a little better, right? But so, how did this come to be?
Okay, so the CEO of our company, Ryan, he has 5 other D2C brands, right? Um, and one of those brands, Nation's Photo Lab, they deliver a ton of packages. And one day he's just out in the warehouse. He's like, "How do we do more with this? Like, I see there's a lot of potential here. What could we do? Like, how can I put a smile on the customer's face?" And that's when he kind of came up with this idea to try and personalize some packages. And realizing that didn't scale quite as effectively as he was hoping, he was like, all right, well, how do we automate personalizing these packages? Um, and once they kind of figured out the automation out, they looked at the results and they're like, wow, these are amazing. We should roll them out to our other brands. And they rolled them out to other brands. And then after they had rolled them out to everybody else, they're like, I mean, we've got this system down. We should just make this its own standalone company and kind of talk to people about it because every time they rolled it out, it was getting phenomenal results because they were able to build a message to individual audiences instead of like, hey, here's the static flyer that's going and everything.
So it really is personal to the customer
Yes,
in when I open my package. So what would be an example without revealing a client? Can you
sure,
give
sure.
an example of what I'm sitting there, I'm opening my package. What might I find in there that's specific to me?
Okay, so you can personalize them on any data point that you have in your CRM, essentially, which is like again, they could be like, hey, here's your first name. Thank you for ordering this, or thank you for being a member this long, or we notice you're not in our loyalty program. If you enroll, you can get X, Y, and Z.
Hmm.
Um, or maybe you're a little bit further in and it's like, hey, you've been a part of our loyalty program, but you haven't used any of your points. You've got, 10,000 points. Here's something that we think you'll like based on your purchase history that you could get just by scanning this QR and we'll send it to you. Like,
Mhm.
they can be really, really personalized. Think of anything you could do in an email template, and take that and you can put it into these notes that go inside of the package now.
Mhm. Fascinating. And one of the things we talk about in this CX professional a lot is, and you just mentioned it, the end-to-end customer experience. Unfortunately, a lot of times it stops when the package is sent.
Right.
And so, and then it starts up again if we have a return or we have a complaint or whatever it might be. And we're always striving for that reorder. You've kind of taken that to a different level now with this unboxing strategy by continuing that end to end through the entire purchase.
Right. No, I agree. I feel like the product that we're working with is really an amazing technology. And what we look at most is the reorder rate, right? Because we're trying to measure brand loyalty and see like how often are people reordering and how far can we stretch that. Um, so for instance, in that example I gave where it's like, oh, you could scan this and spend your points, like that's it's great that they got the exact action. They took that exact action, but what we really cared about is like, did they place the next order? Um, and what we try to do is create audiences from beginning to end and see how much can we bring those reorder rates up, and again, how far can they go?
Hmm. Interesting. And you also talk about the creation or the development of loyalty by the customer through this process. Can you share
Sure,
with us a little bit more about that? Because we always think
absolutely.
about loyalty in terms of, well, they reordered, and you just mentioned it. And that's important. Obviously, a reorder is important, but what aspects are you looking at when you talk about this loyalty process?
Okay, so the reorder rate, it's kind of an end result. To understand how to manipulate your reorder rate, what you really need to do. Sorry, major cliffhanger.
You're back. Right. Yeah,
Okay.
we were all in.
Well, what you
You're
really
like,
need to do,
what?
all right. So what you really need to do to build your loyalty is be sure to help your customers understand who your brand is. And you're going to do that not in one order, not in two orders, but across a dozen orders. You're going to send them tidbits, and every time they order from you, you're going to give them something in return, whether that's 10% off or an easier return process. Like you want to show your customers how much you care and how invested you are in their success, and they're going to remember you. The end goal is next time that need, whatever that need is for the customer arises, you are top of mind as I trust that person. They are good to me. I'm going to order from them again. Um, and so in order one, maybe it's, just a thank you for ordering. We can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Here's something you should know about our brand. And it doesn't have to be your whole brand story. It could just be one basic thing. Um, Maybe the next time they order, it's like, by the way, did you know that when you order, you're actually supporting X, Y, and Z? Uh, and so it's just like think of them as, dating somebody to marry, right? Like if you ask somebody to marry you on your first date, they likely and maybe rightfully will think you're a little crazy. Um, but if you build it up over time, you're like, hey, I know this about you, I know this about you, I know this about you. We're a great fit. Like maybe we should be long term. And that's really how people need to be thinking of their brands. And it just like any successful marriage, right? Like once you're together, like you've got to keep working on it. So if they say, "Hey, I'm unhappy with this," you should have a really great process to make sure that you rectify that issue and make them incredibly happy with the result.
And you're, I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is building trust, but it sure beats getting an invoice in a package when you open it, right? It's a totally different situation to open a package and see my invoice or packing slip as opposed to
Right.
what you're talking about.
Right. And I think what most the obstacle I hear from most brands is we haven't done this before. This isn't in our budget. And it's true. It's not really a conversation a lot of marketers or CX people are having internally, like, oh, we should figure out how to do this. Um, but I would counter that doing things the way we've always done them has never been the right reason to stay the course, right? Like we've always done it this way isn't a good response. And to your point, yeah, just shooting off an invoice or a packing slip isn't going to be the same as like sending something personal and meaningful to somebody. Um, and whether you make it look like it's a handwritten note on your company letterhead or whether it's just like a really personalized flyer, um, both those options beat out, the invoice. Oh, but one thing I will say is a lot of people have tried putting, a static insert. I should have started with this. There are people probably listening right now who are like, I've put a static insert in the
No.
box before and it didn't do anything. Yeah, that's because you're marketing to everyone, and marketing to everyone, as we hopefully all know, is marketing to no one. So yeah, the static piece isn't going to work. It's not going to cut it. So maybe don't do that.
Well, it's a little bit. I mean, I've gotten those envelopes filled with coupons, for aluminum siding and whatever. And I think, well, I don't have aluminum siding on my house, so it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And so to your point, I toss it right. I don't even look at. I look at aluminum siding. I toss. No offense to anybody who's working for an aluminum siding company, but I mean that I think that's really a good point that you're making. Is it's targeting, and again. It's reminiscent of a number of years ago when we really were talking about one-to-one marketing, and we kind of got away from that to more of a mass marketer, and you're bringing us back in this process to targeted one-to-one marketing that we knew 15, 20 years ago worked, and we went away from it, and now it sounds like it's working again for your
Oh,
clients that
yeah, yeah.
that do it. Mhm.
And one of the ways, if anybody out there is thinking like, I want to try this myself, but I don't want to pay a company, right? Like, just do some handwritten notes. You can put them in there. You'll see the responses come back. They'll be more positive. But if you try this and let's say you've tried the static insert before, and your customers might be a little numb to it, or you think they're, on the receiving end, just tossing them in the bin. Just make sure whatever personalization you use, we call them tokens. Like if their first name token is there, it's really clear that it's on the page. So, like, if we have somebody doing a flyer or it resembles a flyer, right? We always recommend like put their first name as like the biggest text on this thing and maybe change the color, because the average person they receive a lot of junk, right? And they don't necessarily pay attention to it. But when you write in their first name in a bright color, like they're like, oh, that's for me. I'm gonna read this.
It's funny. I just this past Labor Day weekend, I ordered some seafood for a big family event from an online seafood purveyor. And when I opened the box, of course, it's all packed and ice packed and so forth. But when I opened the package, right there on top was a personal card. And it wasn't one of those where they just put my name on the top, and their name on the bottom. It was actually handwritten and said, "Hope you enjoy your seafood for the Labor Day weekend," or something. And it was like, it didn't feel, it felt really personal. I'll put it in a positive. It felt real personal. Like, hey, somebody that packed this seafood took the time out to write this note.
Right.
And of course, what I did was I showed it to people, as I was unpacking these. And look at this. Somebody that packed this actually wrote a note to me. And that's pretty cool. That builds, it really does build brand loyalty.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the other thing I would caution against anybody doing is, to your point, is like, don't be artificial in
Right,
your approach
right,
to personalization.
right, exactly. Right. Well, you talk about that authenticity too. I mean, just people will know it's not real.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a really good point.
The
Uh,
the
Go
more
ahead.
effort you make into making it relevant, the better your personalizations are going to be. I mean, but there's kind of a creep factor, right? Like you don't want to be like, hey, we know what color shirt you're wearing today. Like that's too much personalization. Too much. You've known too much. You've given too much information away.
Yeah. Listeners, I mean, you can tell we're talking to Tyler DeLarm from UnDigital. You can tell he's got a fair amount of experience in this, and the do's and don'ts that he's been sharing with us in this process.
I've seen some really funny things.
I bet you have. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, Tyler, is you talk about the psychology behind high performance marketing. And in the customer experience world right now, we're talking a lot about emotions and
Mhm.
how those impact the experience. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that psychology behind high performance marketing?
Sure, sure. Again, the main thing I'll always go back to is when the customer's need arises again, and it will likely arise again, you want them to feel good about their interactions with you. You want them to feel like they can trust you, and you certainly want them to feel like they haven't been let down. Um, and when they come back to you, it's your responsibility every time to give them a really sterling performance. And when you fall short, to immediately rectify that as quickly as possible. The way somebody feels about you determines whether or not they're going to start looking for alternative brands, right? And if you aren't in a position to make them feel good, or if you're not doing a good job, of course, they're going to go somewhere else. And that
Mm-hmm.
can be caused by all sorts of things, right? Maybe it's poor customer service. Maybe it's your price point has shifted dramatically. Um, maybe what you've changed in your message no longer appeals to them, right? Like maybe you've moved from being a green brand to sort of you're more of like the corporate passing as green brand now, and you're no longer like the brand that they believed you once were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting too. And and you mentioned something, what I would characterize as a service recovery process. And what we found in research is that if you have a relationship with a customer and they trust your brand and they've had good experiences with you, if a mistake happens, they give you a lot of leeway
Yeah.
but you have to recover quickly. To your point, you have to recover quickly, but they give you leeway because they say, I've had 5 great experiences and this one isn't. And they're not as harsh with a company that makes a mistake that they trust. There seems to be some give and take from the consumer. Does that ring true to what your experiences have been?
Oh, absolutely. Again, it's about relationship building, right? And the more you know someone, the more you're like aware of their positives and their negatives, the more you're like, all right, I am going to be a little bit more lenient with this because I respect this person or I care about this person. Um, and I know maybe some people hearing this are like, well, you're a brand. They can't truly care about you. They can't truly respect you. And I would argue with that person night and day because you can establish a real genuine relationship with a customer or with a series of customers and makes them feel like you care, you see them, you understand their needs, you're able to meet those needs. And as a brand or an organization, like that should ultimately be your goal is to make sure that your customer base feels like you understand them.
Mhm. So Tyler, you mentioned a few times the pushbacks that you got. Like you've said, you're probably sitting there saying this to yourself. I love that because my guess is that's exactly what you face time and time again in trying to convince people that this makes sense. Is that true?
It's very true, and I'll tell you the largest pushback you're gonna get is from people in the fulfillment center. Your average CX team or your average marketing team, they're on it. They're like, we totally get this, we love this, we want it tomorrow. It's the fulfillment center that's usually like, I think this is gonna slow us down. Um, and I will just address momentarily, like we have the technology set up in such a way that it can sit in any fulfillment center, right? Like whether it's a packing station or an automated conveyor line, like we have a technology solution that works for that. We're doing this for some truly giant brands. We can handle your process and it won't slow it down.
Uh, Now, being an operations guy, Tyler, I'm laughing because that's exactly what we would say in fulfillment. What do those marketing people want to do now? And do they know that I'm held accountable to a productivity number? So I'm glad you brought that up because those are just some of the barriers we face. I mean, anywhere when we're processing orders or we're getting involved in that, we have to strike that balance. And I think your ability to say, "Hey, this is what makes it easy to do," and is effective, that's really important.
Yes. So I promise you the process is faster if you're pre-printing and like storing things in batch, like you're gonna free up room in the warehouse. Your brand is gonna see higher order volumes. I don't know if that makes you happy or not. Somebody in the fulfillment center is happier about the higher order volume, but yeah, that
Right, right.
that is a side
That's
effect.
any more war stories you want to share with people that you've run into?
Um, all I can say is if you're in fulfillment and somebody comes to you and asks for this service or a service similar to it, just give it a go for a couple of months. I swear to you that the end result is that you're going to see happier customers, a higher order volume, and more revenue. And no matter what you think of, like, oh, I've got to get these boxes out the door in this period of time, or if this slows us down by this much, like just test it. Test it.
Hmm.
You will not regret trying something new.
Hmm. And Tyler, have you done this? I know you're B2C. Um, have you tried this across different industries, organizations, product types, and so forth?
Yes. Okay. So, like I mentioned earlier, like I manage a lot of these strategies for our customers. So, like I am the one on the other side doing the math and being like, okay, this template is doing really well. This one they should probably change over, or this data is not statistically significant yet. Um, And then I come back with like, "Hey, I noticed you're doing this on your account. Like, here's something that you could do that would raise your revenue by like $100,000 over the next 3 months or something like that." Um, and so, oh, sorry, this is all tied into their order feed on our side. I know probably the average unboxing marketer, if you're out there personalizing stuff and you don't know what I'm talking about right now, it's because we have a platform that ties into the customer's order feed. So when, for instance, we send a template to customer A and a template to customer B and C, and then we see which one has the highest reorder rate. And then we're like, okay, A is doing well, cut B and C, and maybe start some kind of new split test. And then we tie that back into the revenue generated by
Mm.
each template. So we can see like this template generated this much revenue, or this template isn't performing as well as it should. Like swap it out, or send all of the traffic to this new one.
Hmm. So it's not a one size fits all. It is really targeted based on the test results that you're getting back.
Yes. So if we weren't able to show people how much revenue they were making, right? Like it would be a hard sell in the fulfillment center because we usually have to go back to a fulfillment team and be like, listen, you've worked on this, you've made this change. Here's how much revenue you've added for the company. Because sometimes the fulfillment center is they feel, how to explain this? They're responsible for getting a certain number of packages out the door. But when you can say, hey, you did that plus you got this much revenue, if they're like a third party fulfillment team, um, they're able to go back to the brand and be like, hey, we helped you make this much revenue. And they really appreciate that. And it makes that change so much easier for them to sell internally and to their customers sometimes. Like um, we found it's very important to be able to track how much revenue certain templates are generating.
Mhm. I really think that's impactful, Tyler. We talk a lot about this in customer experience where we have to bring all the different functional units together to create whatever we're trying to create, whether that be a product, a marketing promotion, an unboxing strategy, but bring them in early and often into the process rather than at the end, walking into a fulfillment center and saying, here, start, I'm simplifying your process
Yeah,
much
yeah.
too much, but put this in a box, right? It's by involving people in that whole process, and that's what makes the experience better. So hats off to you for recognizing that and bringing people into the process early, and then saying, look at what the results are, right?
Right.
Oftentimes we might not hear of that, but again, in customer experience, here's the results. We did X and we got Y, and here's the results. So that's really positive.
Um, and I think one thing I didn't kind of underscore here is like since it's print on demand, right? Like there's I just use the pack station. Like they had a printer, we replaced the printer with a an in-package personalization unit. Like basically they print the packing slip or something, and the piece that they need to put in the box comes right out. Like there's no going back to sort through anything or figure out which flyer goes in. It's like so that we've got brands that have literally hundreds of templates. And so every time a customer orders, it's like, oh, okay, here's this person's template. It goes in the box. So like there's no one in the fulfillment center has to really do much with it, other than just take it off whatever printer, or if it's on the conveyor belt, they have to do literally nothing. Um, so there's not a lot of effort on the like there's not a lot of extra lift on the fulfillment team's part. And for people in CX and marketing, it's like if you've got, I don't know, you're like, I have this idea, I want to roll it out tomorrow. It's literally just a matter of, okay, I'm gonna take my idea, upload the template into the editor, and then the next order out, it goes into that box.
Mhm. Excellent. Tyler, this has been a fantastic conversation. As always, our conversations go by quickly when the subject matter is so interesting. So I appreciate your time. If people want to learn more about this process, how might they best get in touch with you or UnDigital, or what's your best route for contact?
Sure, sure. So if somebody wants to just learn more about what we're doing, right, they can always go to undigital.com. That's UnDigital. And if they want to reach out and email us, it's solutions@undigital.com. Those are the fastest way to get a hold of us. We'll email you back same day.
And I forgot to ask you this at the beginning, and if you mentioned this, I apologize for forgetting. But how does the term undigital come to be?
Oh, it's just about, the physical print, right? Like we want to bring digital marketing into a physical space.
Interesting. Okay, very good. Well, Tyler, this has been great. Tyler DeLarm from UnDigital. We appreciate your time today. Fascinating conversation, and I know our CX listeners will have to really consider this as a way to build loyalty and the end-to-end experience.
Thank you so much.
And listeners, this has been another episode of the All Things Considered CX podcast. Thank you for joining us, and as always, share it with your networks and stay tuned for a future podcast. Bye for now.